Hey, Being at Work listeners, welcome back to another episode. It's your host, Andrea Butcher. And, just before I hit record, I was overcome with gratitude for this show and this forum and our amazing guests, because it's a place where we get to go a bit deeper as we highlight our humanity at work. And I find for me as a leader, it is a place to work out the very real struggles, the daily leadership challenge. So when I first met today's guest over a virtual meeting a few months ago, I knew immediately I want her on this show because she was so real in talking about the challenges in the workplace today. She was also real about her own stuff. Literally within 5 minutes of meeting her, she said, I can go from extreme awesomeness to extreme shittiness multiple times a day. And I was a me too for that. I mean, isn't that the truth? How it all coexists. I mean, it is our being at work. So let me tell you about our fabulous guest today. Dr. Patti Fletcher is an expert in large-scale transformation. Transformation, not change management, as she'll talk about. And she highlights disruption as a superpower. She even has a great book. I encourage everyone to check it out, called Disruptors: Success Strategies from Women Who Break the Mold. So listen in as Patti and I have a very real conversation. She got me thinking about something in such a different way. See if you can catch that. So listen in as we talk about showing up as the best version of yourself for yourself. We'll also talk about getting really clear on why you are disrupting. And we'll also talk about accepting reality and starting from where you are. Check it out.
The truth is, I work in tech, as you know. So there are two things every time I walk around, like when I'm looking at someone, like I'm looking at you now, I see a bunch of data all around your head that I'm no doubt collecting and using, right?
My feelings wheel.
Yes, I see.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And then what I also think about is, what is your story? Because everyone has a story that got them to where they are. And it's my way of really trying to understand. I don't care what people think. I care more about how they think and why they think that way, right? And that's one of the superpowers of a disruptor. And so I'm no different, right down to the data. And I'm a sucker for anything that's ad, and I'll buy it all, and I'm crazy. So people are collecting all sorts of data on me. But in terms of my story, no different than anyone else. The work that I do, which is really about leveling the playing field so that everybody can thrive. And I have a particular expertise when it comes to gender equity in the workplace, which is extended to equity for all in the workplace. But that came a few generations before I was even born. My mother is first generation American. Both of her parents were impacted from the genocide in Armenia that started in 1915. So her dad had lost his mother over a childbirth. And he and his dad and brothers came here over to the States right as things were heating up. And then my grandmother's family, my great grandmother was actually pregnant with my grandmother when the genocide happened. My grandmother was the youngest of 10. They obviously couldn't leave. My grandmother then lost both of her parents and had to go from refugee camp to refugee camp, and just had she and her sisters, they really had no agency in their own lives. Their brothers, with the best intentions, tried to make all the decisions for them. There's a whole story there. But here I am, right? My mother was then very adamant, and, every generation tries to do, we've all seen the Barbie movie, and it's absolutely true, right? You try to do a bit more and really help your child get further than you. And my mom was really raised with this whole, just in her face, her dad wasn't a good guy. It was an arranged marriage between my grandparents. He just wasn't a good guy. And so my grandmother, she just never had agency in any situation, could never make her own decisions, couldn't, support herself, was never going to go get a job. And so my mom put herself through secretary school and really raised her three girls. There were three of us, I'm the youngest of three, to understand one, education. We were the first generation to go to college. Education is critical, especially for a woman, because she was raised during a time when that education equated to choice in being able to support yourself. So it was always be able to support yourself, don't rely on anyone, be able to have your own bank account, right? All of those things. And for me, what's always really interesting, and this is something I started to do, especially with Facebook, when you're reconnecting with people who knew you when, right? And it's always interesting to hear from my older sisters or the kids I grew up with that are not surprised that I've done the work that I've done, which is essentially be the person who goes on stage and talks about unpopular topics. That's my job, right? That's my jam. And, it can be like a really weird life, but I've always had this thing around injustice and particularly around gender equity. And it's probably from watching my grandparents. My Nana helped to raise me because my mom was a working mom before working moms were a thing. And I realized at some point in time, probably in high school, and I grew up in a town, very small town, America, meat and potatoes. The boys who played sports ruled the world, the usual thing, very kind of white culture. I always felt kind of stifled there. Good for some kids, not a good place for me, especially because I was a little weird and thought differently. But what I remember just really having this realization in high school in the 1980s that what made me different from the place I came from was one, I always had a belief that I could do anything because that's what my parents raised me to believe. You work hard enough, you're going to be able to achieve it. Not a connected family. We had no money, none of those things. So they were setting that foundation. Work really hard, show up, and eventually it's going to happen, right? Be intentional, which is something you do. And the next thing is, I can't stand injustice. And so, what does that mean? Looking at status quos that are antiquated, they no longer serve the world in which they live because they're inefficient, right? They cost too much money, take too much time, they're ineffective, they don't achieve the things they're supposed to achieve. And by the way, those two E's are the reason most people create startups, right? But then I've added on over the years equitable. And that really came during my PhD when I started learning more around equity in the workplace. This is way before Lean In. We didn't talk, you didn't want to be that woman, especially in tech, talking about those things. Of course, I couldn't shut my mouth, right? So it had to be equitable. And then MBA school kind of taught me it also needed to be an economic imperative. And what's so interesting over time, learned that women reinvest 90% of what they make back into the community around them. So they're always thinking about economic development. So that's really where this came from, this realization that here I am, right? My grandmother, my mother were the victims of when they were born, where they were born, the religion that they had, right? The gender they had. And here I am in America, born in 1969, and let's face it, right? I'm Caucasian, which, lots of privilege there. And instead of my ancestors who had no say in their lives in order to survive, staying at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, they had to be quiet. Literally, my grandmother was put in a bureau drawer when the soldiers came and killed her mother, and she had to be quiet. And legend goes, at 6 months old, she didn't make a peep until one of her siblings opened the drawer and got her out, right? This is my grandmother. And so I knew that I had this responsibility to use this mouth that can't keep shut, use these ears that can't not listen. And it's also when I didn't realize it, but I was being a disruptor. And we'll talk a lot about that around. I never really gave a crap if I was in a position of power because I knew I had power and I was not afraid to use it. You get beaten down a lot when you do, right? And you gotta, talk about growing a thick skin, which was not easy for me. I was a pretty sensitive kid, but that's really how it came here. And fast forward, I got to travel around a lot. I was the youngest, like I said, in a working class family. My sisters are much older. They didn't get a lot of things because if my parents had to buy for one, they had to buy for the other. Nobody told me I was supposed to ask for permission for stuff. So I would just go sign up for stuff, including I'm going to go travel over in Europe and I'm going to go to school in Europe. Sure. My mother took another job for me to do it, but it really started to open my eyes to things, right? And to see kind of the world and the world I lived in through a different set of eyeballs, right? What people really, really thought. It was so interesting. But it also really made me question, what is my view of the world and where do I contribute, whatever the heck that looks like? So I went and worked. I went to grad school in London, came back here, worked for SAP, and really grew up in tech and fell in love with tech. While I was working, I was the sole provider for my family. My husband's a stay-at-home dad for our two girls. He's gone back to work. They're older now. But while I was working in tech, which was very, very exciting because I really do, it's in a level playing field, right, that you get from tech. It really changes everything. It permeates every part of our existence. It was very, very exciting, and I continue to love it. But I ended up doing my doctorate because I wanted to research like a scholar to find out my grandmother and her family. And what I ended up doing, I was a year and a half into a dissertation that was very technical and focused and virtual and all that fun stuff, all about transformation in virtual environments for new technology. It was kind of what I was doing, and was forced to take a feminist leadership theory class, forced, because I was raised by a meat and potatoes guy who was like, feminism is an or, not an and. And this is the guy who I remember like probably since the day I was born, watching the news with him every day. And he and I arguing, like seeing all these women burning bras in the streets and, all these college girls, and him being like, if you ever do that, I'm going to take you out of school, and you want equal rights, open your own damn door. And I'm like 3, taking a binky out, like, I don't think so, right? So, just, yeah. And like, thanks, Dad, because the truth is he raised me to be a feminist, right? Which was quite fun. But anyway, I took this feminist leadership theory class. And the first day, what I realized, which is something I know and I'm not saying this to be self-depreciating, but I'm the dumbest person in the world. Because here I am. Back then, you really, truly didn't talk about how the deck is stacked against you as a woman. And so I'm taking this class and I'm learning who she is and the kinds of research she did, and just going, God, I have all of these things in my head that I've been conditioned to believe. This is the right way to make a decision. Never felt that way for me before, right? So those rules didn't apply, which is why people thought I was a disruptor. It wasn't that. I just didn't like their rules. It didn't make sense to me. I didn't know how to do them. But it also was around, where the hell is everybody? I was always the only woman, right? But what I really focused on was being the youngest, being the only American, the only one not coding. And that's what really set this off. While I was learning about this, I was also learning about my family. I was learning about what really happened because my grandfather was abusive. He really separated his wife's family and his own family from himself. So I was learning so much about that. It was fascinating. At the same time, I decided to switch my dissertation to focus a phenomenological study of women who held board of director positions in publicly held life sciences and tech businesses. They were the most tech intensive at the time. There were only about 15 of them, and I got to interview them to find out how they got to not only where so few women go, but so few human beings go. And that's what really that foundation was. And it was interesting happening at the same time with where I came from, but then studying these women that they grew up on farms, right? Very few went to tier 1 schools, right? They were so much like me, but they taught me so much about the power that women can have that is truly transformative. And that although the deck is stacked against you, it's really your mindset and your heart set that matter the most. And that's my story.
Wow. Can I just say wow to all of that? And it's just listening to you, Patti, I see the dots and the threads. And I mean, it is the transformation work you are doing. I see the personal connection back to your grandma story. I see this natural strengths you have in having confidence and having conversations that are unpopular and pushing the needle. And even to your dad raising you to be a feminist, it's also purposeful and has led you so well now to everything that you're doing.
What a kind thing to say. Thank you. And, I get asked a lot, why did you write this book, Disruptors? And here's the thing. Being a female disruptor is incredibly lonely. It's very lonely. And if you read the epilogue at the end of the book, it really drives home this story. So there's this author, Chris Bojalian, and he's a novelist. I really like him, not just because he's Armenian. We Armenians, we're only 0.004% of the world. So we look for each other. YAN, IAN, last names, we're all in, we're high-fiving. And so, right. So he writes all these incredible stories, and he was doing a book tour, and he went back to Armenia, not where my people are from or his, are from Turkey, Armenia, but this is our new homeland. So he went back there, and he and his posse he was traveling around with were about ready to go in their van to go back to a hotel or whatever they were doing. And this guy runs up to him. This Turkish guy runs up to him, and he's in Sarınrush, or I can't remember. He's somewhere in Armenia. So the guy runs up and he says, "Before you go, I want you to meet my mother-in-law. Will you come with me?" So they follow this guy around these windy things in the mountains. And by the way, where they are is where this happened a lot, where Armenians were literally marched to this cliff and pushed over and killed. They were just, yeah, it was awful. And so every Armenian on this planet has been impacted by the genocide. Lost over 1 million people, right, in an already small generation, a small population of people. So anyway, so that's where they are. They go and they meet this woman. And Chris tells the story. He's like, it's so interesting because I really thought it was about me meeting her. That's what he wanted. But let me tell you the story about this woman. So she was an infant, and her dad was killed, and she and her mother were about ready to be pushed over this cliff. And this Turkish soldier, like, kind of grabbed her and married her and raised this woman who is now like 90 or 99 years old. She was very, very old. Lots of Armenians don't know they're Armenians in Turkey. And so, but she did. The reason for this meeting, and it tears me up every time, it wasn't about him meeting her. It was about her meeting him because she was so secluded. Do you know she thought she was the last Armenian on earth?
Oh my gosh.
And so before she died, she meets him and sees no, and he's able to tell her that she's not, and here's who we are, and here's what we've done. And that is so representative of a female disruptor, because how often have any of your listeners, have you felt that you were the only one who saw the things that you saw, that you were the only one who cared about the things that you cared about? And I'm here to tell you, through this work I've done in the stages and the writing, what really that brings me to is I'm not the only one. There are so many of us, and we come together, and social media has been very, very helpful with that. But it's also so important why we must support each other. We must bring each other along, because we know feminism is an and not an or equation.
It's such a good point. And acknowledge the things that are tripping us up and aren't working, because I think we have in our heads, we've normalized those things. One of the things I love so much about your book is you highlight a lot of those subtle kinds of things that are really shitty and detrimental towards women, but that we have put up with. There were reminders in there for me, like, yeah, I've experienced that, and that feels really shitty. And you know what? That's a problem we're solving. Like, my feeling shitty, that needs to be solved for. But so
And it's not up to you, right? Right? So we as women have been trained, fix your own
like,
damn
I
problem.
got to figure this out.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
bullshit, because the system is not going to let you do that. Right? It's systemic.
I had a CEO say to me pretty early in my career, it was like maybe 15 or 20 years ago. He said, I was vulnerable. It took a lot of courage to say, "Hey, I'm struggling with something." And his exact words were, "Don't wish it were easier, Andrea. Wish you were better." And so what did I do? Like, you're right. I've got to be better. But it's like, no, the system is not supporting my success here.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not about being easy. That's not what you were saying, right?
Right.
When no matter what you do is not going to work because it's not you, it's the system, that's a problem. There's so much to go into there as to why, right? Like, why what's happening in the world is happening, but why that conversation just happened.
So break it down. I mean, so you definitely have a systems approach, and you talk a lot about big things that need to be changed. And I admire your tenacity in that. But you also bring it down to the individual and help individuals take ownership over your part. So break it down for us. Like, what, if we're thinking about disruption as a superpower, for me as a leader, what's going to be helpful in that?
Yeah. So first is, why are you disrupting? Right. So regardless of your political or, spiritual views, when we look at the world at any point in time that has been documented, what's it been about? It's been about power. It's been about who is in power and who gets to wield that power. And in order to have power and wield it, what do you need? Money. And that money buys influence, right? So the system is set up for a very specific and minority population on this earth to have that power, keep that power, so they're the only ones wielding that power. And we are smacked in the face with that, but I have to tell you, it's been happening forever. So disruption, let's go back to the way that I define it. Disruption is looking at a status quo, inequitable, doesn't benefit the broadest number of people. And I am not just talking about the underrepresented populations. I'm talking about everybody. It's not, it doesn't work. It costs too much money, right? It has large barriers to entry, right? In terms of efficiency and effectiveness. And so things are going to happen. The world is constantly disrupting around us. I can't stand change is the only constant. It's complexity. That's the only constant, and especially with tech. What I mean by that is, of course, the complex adaptive systems. You and I are having this conversation. You said something to me before we started taping about intention. It brought up, right, it conjured some feelings, but it also brought up how I'm now going to start my day differently. It's a big deal. Because when you put an intention out there, you're essentially putting something in here and in here, and it's going to happen, right? Because it becomes the driver for what you're going to do. As a result of me doing that, the people I work with, right, my family, whatever, I'm going to say things and act differently, which means they're going to say things and act differently, right, and so on. And eventually, Andrea, this stuff's going to come back to you, and it's going to feel different. It's complex adaptive. We all adapt. And so the disruption piece is we can't help but be disrupted, and we don't like to be disrupted. But what's really important, we as women know, going back to Carol Gilligan. So just super fast, Carol Gilligan is considered the grandmother of feminist leadership theory. And so one of the things she did, when she was a PhD student at Harvard, she was one of the PhD candidates who was working with Lawrence Kohlberg, whose construct around value-based decision-making still holds true in every single boardroom and C-suite that we have. And it's essentially prioritizes the best value-based decisions are based on justice, hierarchy, and rules. And when I first looked at that, I thought, all right. But then I remembered, as a systems approach, is my version of justice the same as your version of justice? Probably not, because it's set up for you to succeed, person who's in power, not for everyone to succeed. Unfair competition. Rules. Your rules are to keep you in power and be able to wield that power, not for me to be able to go and get some power to make a difference, right? And then hierarchy. I don't believe in that, right? So those decisions, by the way, do matter. Military, there's a fire, right? It's like crisis, anything like that makes sense. It's called A to B decision making.
Well, so in that example, disruption is going to be tough because there's going to be a lot of resistance.
It's always resistance.
It's always resistance. So who's to say that disruption is necessary? I mean, it's subjective, right?
Well, it's subjective, but it's really, if you have a status quo, it's not working, right? It's not making you the money, it's not achieving the outcome, then what has to be different? And let's not forget, there are people who make decisions and people who have to execute. So when we look at Carol Gilligan's work, she decided to do the exact same study when she got her PhD. She decided postdoctoral. She did the exact same study, but different population. Kohlberg's population were all middle-aged white men, wealthy middle-aged white men. She did it with women. And what she found
Wow.
is that value-based decisions, and she wasn't replacing it, right? She's a feminist, can also be relational. People with feminist leadership traits, not just gender, but traits, are relational. Every decision we make is in relation to its impact on the people with the biggest stake. This employee population, these citizens, these whatever. That's why we're not in C-suites and boardrooms. It's one of the biggest reasons, because it takes too long to make a decision. And yet it's those same reports that show, thank God we do, because when we're in the room, we make better acquisition decisions, better, whatever decisions. With disruption, who says? It depends on what the situation is. But here's what's really, really important. That Kohlberg approach is, I have a hammer and you're a nail. Do what I say. Last time I checked, I don't want to change. If you tell me to change, So the people who really can create the disruption are the people who understand everyone has a story and there's data you can connect on, and you have to understand why that guy doesn't want things to change. What his thoughts are less important than how he's thinking and why he's thinking that way. So understand where someone's coming from, and then use relational decision making, meaning you understand that not everyone's a nail and you have a hammer. Instead, you understand that people don't change when you tell them to change. They change when you enable them to change. And people are going to come to that change in a few different ways. One, they're super excited about it because they are failing in that current system, right? And like, finally, they tend to be your early adopters. They're raising their hands, right? They're jumping up and down. There's indifference. People who are living in the system and it doesn't really impact them, that much. So they're kind of like, whatever, or it's the devil, right? In the list of 100 different priorities, that might be 101. And then there's the people who are super resistant because they're going to lose their power or perceive they're going to lose their power and they don't want to compete for it, right? They're used to that. So how do you make a change? Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't, and you have to be willing to walk away. One thing I would say to women is understand, going back to, am I the only one? No, you're not. Make sure you are on the right stage, that when you are working at something, talking about something, that it's authentic to you. It's something you actually care about, a change you want to bring in the world. In order to be a disruptor, you're all about change, right? If there's no change, there's no Patti. I'm bored stiff. I'm very comfortable in the discomfort. I can't stand being comfortable, just not my jam. And so especially about, forward moving topics I care about. So right stage, but that second piece is, am I in front of the right audience? And it doesn't mean you try once and you fail and you move on, right? Unless it's really bad. It means that no matter what you do, meeting people where they are, having them, it's the pro-sci approach, right? Having them, the anchor model, having them be aware of the change, then getting them to a place of a personal desire to be part of the change. And then you give them the ability to do it, the knowledge to do it, and you reinforce it. When you get to a point where you can't get people for that personal desire because they can't get past the fact that you are taking power away, which you're not, that's how they're looking, you might want to look for a different audience because trust me, they are out there. And if you're an employee and you're going, yeah, but I'll tell you something, I am an employer, right? And I've been in this space for a very long time. And I remember one of the women in my book, Pat Gilligan, telling me this story. This might even be in the book. I can't remember. But she used to go to all of the, like I do, right? You go to like the different MBA schools, you talk to the women in the schools. But she would do this thing where she would be at like Stanford or Harvard and say, okay, so how many of you, when you go for a job interview, how many of you ask them how your career will be supported equally to a man's career? Not one hand raised. How many of you ask how they will guarantee that you are paid on par with your male colleagues? No one raises their hand. These are Harvard and Stanford graduates. And the response back to them is, look, these employers need you more than you'll ever need them, right? Your skills, your relationships, your competencies. So it goes back to, we have so much power, but we're not in power. And the only way to make that happen is by disrupting those status quos. And sometimes we have to go outside of the system in order to do that. And that's what a lot of these women did, right? If you can't work within the system you have, you go create your own, invite the rest of us to join you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sphere of influence. What can I control where I am with the resources I have, with the knowledge I have? What can I do? It's chunking it because sometimes the problem feels so big and overwhelming.
That. And I love what you just said, right? It always comes back to, where do I have control and where can I feel change immediately, right? Where can I make an immediate impact? But the other thing you just said around large scale transformation. So, what's the difference between change management and large scale transformation? In my world in tech, we talk about change management all the time. Change management is the equivalent of retooling. You use this product, now you're going to use that product. Few different ways of doing things. Transformation, though, is when you bring in the things you care about, right? When you have to value different things, you have to think differently. That's why AI requires transformation, because it changes our construction of meaning and how we can interact with each other and ourselves and blah, 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 all of that stuff. And so, in order to get to that kind of transformation, which is the stuff we're talking about, it's societal and the constructs, right? These are big deals, right? These are the bedrocks of how the world is run and how we interact. It has to come back to what you just said. And that means that you are looking for incremental progress. I'm talking tiny, tiny bits of progress before perfection. As much as I can't stand the book Lean In, she was absolutely right on that. Focus on progress over perfection. It's critical because remember, our world gets disrupted every day. So what might look like success one day might not be the next. You're looking for progress toward, what are those things you believe must be true? versus where are you today, or where is the world today? And what are those progress points, those tiny little things, the people signed on, people, having different conversations, those complex adaptive system kind of discussions we've talked about, even the minute, you have to track those. And you have to be intentional around what they are, who they're with, and what the outcome is supposed to be.
Why is it important to talk about transformation versus change management? Why is that so important?
Because change management literally is just tools. So change management is like, so I work in a tooling world, right? Grew up in enterprise tech. I'm not leaving. I freaking love it. So my career has always been at that intersection of people, business, technology, and eventually when we started really extracting data from the machine, and now we have, human kind of data and sentiment and all that. And so that's where my career has been. And so when people do technical implementations that force a change, it's literally change management becomes how are you going to use this new tool versus how you used to use the other way you used to get this work done. You don't have to believe things are different. Your life's going to be much more focused on efficiency, and hopefully you get some effectiveness measures. But when we talk about things like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, when we talk about things like our culture must value learning, it must value curiosity, that is a mindset, heart set, soul set kind of shift. What we believe is important, what we feel is important, who we work with to make those things important, and what we do. That is transformation. That is not retooling, right? It changes so much. And we can't do it in a silo because we all need to be on the same stage, right? And in front of the right people.
Which goes back to the system. It's all connected. Well, this is really helpful. So when I asked you to break it down, like why is disruption or how is disruption a superpower? You started with you first have to get clear on why you are disrupting. You also talked about I love make sure that you're on the right stage. And what I hear in that is like it's a believability. I really have to feel it in my heart because it's going to be hard to disrupt.
I think for me, I think about it a little bit different. And so when we look at, what sets aside disruptors from people who aren't disruptors, right? So the first is there is a significant amount of gratitude in these people, right? Being able to accept reality, which is something I learned from my grandmother whose parents were killed in a genocide, right? You might not like it, but you got to accept reality. This is where you are starting today. You got to accept it. And then having this kind of purpose, right? So, and I should really change that to calling. I've come to believe over the last year or so that me, aligning my purpose with my profession or living, whatever, is that maybe it's not about living my purpose. Maybe my life is the actual purpose. Maybe your life is the actual purpose. But it's really been about my calling, which it really truly is about women understanding that the way they've been conditioned to define the worthiness of their life and therefore the worthiness of them has been based on the role that we play in the lives of others. Period. End of story. Right?
Good. Yeah.
Women are asked to contribute and make it successful. And what are you going to do to help? And men are like, go define the new big thing, right? That sucks. But we're taught like that, and the rest of the
Yeah.
world looks at us like that. And so instead, my superpower is enabling women to transform their lives by prioritizing and redefining their worthiness based on the role they play in their own lives, which is showing up as the best version of yourself. And today is a little different, or the best version of myself, because I slept differently, right? I might have a little bit of a cold, right? All that stuff. So what do? I stay true to myself. What my stage is about then is my calling. And that's what is so interesting about these women. They are not ego driven, they are purpose driven. They are people who have seen something that's not working, not only for them, but for the rest of the world. And it requires a new product, a new service, and a new way of being, a new way of voting. And their job is to bring that to the world. So many of these women, right, didn't have positional power, right? They weren't your boss who told you, can't be easy, blah, 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 right? So they realize, and I've never believed in power of the position. That's ego. Women are not allowed to have an ego, right? It ain't their amigo. You check it out outside the door. Only men are allowed to have egos. We'll go into that, another podcast, but we're not allowed to. And the truth is, we don't give a shit because we are so kind of, here's the impact we want to make in the world driven, that we create power in the platform. Meaning, this is the change I want to bring to the world. I'm going to make you aware of it. The people who also want to see that change, they might be working toward it. Maybe they were waiting for someone else to go do it, right? But you're inviting all of them on your platform, that stage. And guess what? They become your audience. And you know what else they get to do? They get to create their own platforms, because it's never about her. It is about the change that must take place. Absolutely
Yes.
critical, right?
Gosh, I feel
And that
that.
final piece with the whole being, in your own corner and, redefining your life based on the role you play in your own life is not so you can have the role you play in the lives of others. It's simply that you show up as the best version of yourself based on those authentic callings you might have, the change you want to bring and come to the world. And that you realize that as a disruptor, it is not about confidence. Confidence is a killer. It's why people talk about imposter syndrome and all that fun stuff. Confidence only comes. If you read Malcolm Gladwell's book, right? You have 10,000 hours, you need to be an expert. Confidence only comes after you've done something over and over and over again. Instead, what we understand is we have competence. We women do everything and feel everything on behalf of everybody else, right? So we can handle things other people can't. That in itself is a superpower. But when we employ that ability in true belief that we have everything it takes to figure it out, we know we don't know everything, but this person might know this, and I can learn that from over there, then we got it. Competence over confidence.
Damn. So those are the things that separate disruptors.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And I love the accepting reality. I mean, that was the shift that you helped me to make. Accepting reality. It has to start there.
It does. And it doesn't mean you got to like it, because that's always the pushback I get.
But
Yeah.
it is. When you argue with reality, you will lose 100% of the time.
That's right, exactly.
So this is what is getting grounded in that. And then I love the calling focused versus purpose driven.
Yeah. What do you think your calling is? What is your calling?
I think of it really big as like just being a light and creating a light filled platform where others can share their light.
You know what I think you are? I think you're a lighthouse. Lighthouse is not about shining a light on yourself. It's about shining a light with a clear and safe passage from which you can go from where you are to where you know you want and need to be. You are the lighthouse lighting the way for the rest of us.
Dang. That's so helpful for me.
Yeah, that's who you are.
Yeah. You were talking about power with versus power over and that community. Throughout my career, I've loved like bringing people together to be brilliant together. None of us are as smart as all of us. This show is about people like you who are doing such good work, and it lifts me up to be able to highlight that in the world.
I
Thank
love
you.
that. I love that. Absolutely. No, thank you. And I love that. And you are doing it, right? And I think we both felt it, the kindred spirit the first time we met. And it also makes me think about one of the worst things, and I can't stand it, and I've written about it and I've talked about it way too many stages, and that's queen bee. So you just, you talked about just really this kind of community of women bringing us together and being able, it doesn't mean we have to stay together throughout the entire thing. It might be, and that's also another thing with disruption. Not everyone is going to be on the same path as you. It's in just because they're not on your path doesn't mean they're working against you. They just got their own path. Maybe it'll align with yours sometime, right? One of the best pieces of advice I got was from Bill McDermott when he was CEO of SAP, and said, few things. Take the job that's going to get you the next job, the exposure you're going to get, the people you're going to meet. The next thing is driving change, because he's tech, right? So it's always about change. It's like whitewater rapids. There's boulders you have to go over, go around, or just, go under, basically completely ignore. But that's the same with people. It's not personal, right? So just really understanding that. So instead, go find your right stage. That's incredibly critical. There was something else I was going to say, and I completely forgot.
Well, you've given us so much. I mean, I literally have 2 full pages of notes. So I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you for the book. Thank you for the insights. Thank you for Thank you for the disruption that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I love it. And again, for everyone listening in, my one piece of advice is start from where you are. That's all you have to do. Nothing has to, you don't have to have a degree. You don't have to have the exposure. You simply start from where you are. You put your feet on the ground. You look at the floor below your feet, the ground below your feet. Welcome to your platform.
Yes, because life has given you everything you need.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. The challenges, the adversity, your strengths, all of it.
All of it.
Yeah. What a great tip to end with. But I do have some fun rapid fire questions for you so that we can peer into Dr. Patti Fletcher's soul just a little bit more. So we'll start with something super fun and easy. Patti, what was your first concert?
Duran Duran.
Oh, that's a good
Yeah,
one.
the reflex. That was in the 80s. I had a haircut like John Taylor. He and I were going to get married, apparently. I don't know. I married a Brit, just not him. And I look back now, I'm like, why would he want to date someone who had the same haircut as him? It's weird. But anyway, so Duran Duran. And my oldest sister took me and a friend from high school, and she's, older. She was like a grown up and took us, and God blessed her. But yeah, that was my first concert.
Okay, that's fun. Okay, a little deeper, actually, a lot deeper. What do you wish people understood about you?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. What do I wish? That I don't do too much. What's so interesting, you're one of the few people who listened to my story, right? And it wasn't all of it, but you listened to it and said, Patti, I understand your red thread. Most people, when they hear about the different things I do, right? My day job, my afternoon job, my evening job, and there are a bunch of different things, go, you do too much. Really? Have you not worked in tech before? Everyone's doing. And the truth is, I don't. This is my calling. It is to level the playing field so all talent can thrive, so that women truly can disrupt the world around them for the good of all. That's my calling, right? I'm going to do it. And there are different ways in which I can do that. I can do it by sitting on board seats. I can do it by being in the C-suite of tech. I can do it by writing. I can do it by talking on podcasts. Those are all just things I do for my calling. And it's really annoying for a woman to constantly hear you're doing too
Too
much.
much.
Have you ever said that
Dang.
to someone who has different
Mm,
biology than me?
that's great. That's great. Okay, really good. Last question. Are you ready?
I don't know. Go ahead. I'm doing it anyway. You're disrupting me. Yeah, go ahead.
What makes you feel alive?
Uh, so, of course, my family, right? And of course, being thankful and grateful for them. And I feel the most alive when I am in flow, doing the work with women, understanding why the world is the way it is, right? Really doing the deep work around power and who gets to have it and what do we do with it and how do we disrupt that. I love deep work. I love being the person who is able to go figure out some stuff, ask some questions, and share what I know. And I'm happy when I am not the one being told, go find the answer. And instead, I'm the one who just gets to ask the questions that you haven't been asked before to go find it for yourself. It is wonderful to be part of someone's journey. It gets me every time. It's very selfish because it feels so good. But it's amazing to have people, come up to you and talk to you about all the amazing things they've been able to do simply because they read a word or listened to me on a stage or, worked with me. How freaking awesome is that? Like, that's so cool. I
It's
feel
what
alive
life is
now.
all about. Yeah,
Yeah,
you are. And no wonder you're so vibrant because you are living your calling.
I am.
You are
Finally.
listening to that. You are heeding the call
Yeah, finally. And being unapologetic about it.
and being unapologetic about it. So, if our listeners want to connect with you, where can they find you?
There are a few different ways. So, LinkedIn, of course, Dr. Patti Fletcher, just the DR, Patti with an I. Instagram, same, Dr. Patti Fletcher. I will be putting more content out there. I had to take a little break for some personal reasons, but putting more content out there. And then my website, drpattifletcher.com, and you can find my book there as well.
That's great. Well, Patti, I appreciate you. We'll continue to root for you and lift you up, my friend. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you for the work you're doing. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us for this episode.
Please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast to never miss a Being at Work story.